a couple of minutes. I think we should wait a couple of minutes before we start because a lot of students are in school. They are at the SLZ event center. They're having international student induction and stuff. So there's quite a lot of students there. So I'm guessing this is why we don't have a lot of people joining in at this time. But I'm just going to go on with the introduction, and hopefully we have a lot of people join us, in no time. So first I'm going to introduce myself, then I'm going to introduce the host for today. So my name is Bukoya Balogu. I'm an MSc student, Data Analytics and Technology. I'm also the IEEE chair for this session 2023-2024. So I'm going to introduce the host for today. So first, welcome you all to day 4 of this great event since November to remember. I would say quite a lot has been happening over the first few days. The first day we had a topic on AI, and I really learned a lot from that day 1. 2, we had Dr. I've kind of forgotten the name, but I know it's a very long name, but I really penned down what I learned from the session. That's like the most important thing. She talked about career transitioning, how she switched career from different roles, how she was able to target her CV into the different career paths she wanted to, switch into. So it was really a hands-on session, and we really learned a lot from that. Yesterday also, we had a very resource person also come here to also talk to us about amazing experience, the vast experience that they've had during their years in the service. And I would say this November to remember, it really has its things. So today we're going to continue what we started, the great work, and we're also going to be talking about embarking on an academic odyssey of PhD in transforming people, deeply personal journey. So this is going to come from a professor. So a professor who has vast knowledge in that field is going to tell us how he has transitioned over the years into his field. He's going to tell us, I'm sure he's going to tell us personal experience, how easy it is, and all of the skills we need to have to be this amazing version of ourselves. So I am going to have my pen and paper to jot down all of the experience that we want to get from Dr. Jerome. We will not always have this kind of time with him. I'm sure we have to book in like 1 month before we could get this particular spot. So I'm going to make use of this opportunity to get the most out of this session. And we have Dr. Celestine here also, and we have Sam also here to grace the occasion. I want to thank you all for being here from day 1. Day 4 we are here, and we're still here. So I want to encourage us to keep the energy. And I hope that everyone joining here this evening is going to go home with a bank load, not with cash, not lots of money, a wealthy experience from all of the amazing people that have been here from the beginning of this session up until now, that have shared the vast knowledge areas with us. So let's meet Professor Jerome. Professor Jerome is a professor of psychology. So we're talking about professorship, right? And the best person to deliver that is a professor in that field. So he's a professor of psychology in the University of Bolton. He had his first degree in psychology at the University of Reading, graduating in 1979. I don't think I was born then. I was still probably reigning in heaven. Okay, so after this, he did his master's degree in clinical psychology at the University of East London. Professor Jerome then worked at NHS for 32 years. Wow, that's vast. Okay, so he became a lecturer in clinical psychology at the Institute of Psychiatry, and in 1997, he was promoted to senior lecturer. Wow, that's a lot. Okay, so in 2005, he obtained his PhD from King's College in London. King's College is quite a very popular one. So of course, I can't expect nothing from the best coming out from that institution. So and for most of his working life, Jerome has been a clinical academic, and he's published his first journal paper in 1985, and since then has published over 200 papers. Wow. Wow. Okay. He has co-edited 8 books, with 3 on the topic of mental health recovery, and this has been one of his major research interests. So along with his positive psychology, that's a lot. That's a lot of energy there. So he has also worked in Bolton since 2012. Okay, I remember where I was in 2012. Even if I can't really recall a lot of the 90s, because I believe I was still like reigning in heaven. But I remember where I was in 2012. And 2012 to right now, that's like 11 years now. Yeah, so there's a significant landmark I know that must have been put in place. And he has MSc in positive psychology in northwest of England, which was established in 2016. Wow. So Professor Jerome's ambition are to ensure the students receive the best possible education, which we are currently receiving here at the Bolton University, and that of the psychology department, which becomes one of the top 25 departments in the country. I kind of feel like Bolton is really is drifting and making waves when it in terms of education in the UK here. I mean, I kind of feel like the departments that we have and the great innovations that are coming up in each of these departments is making the university really, pave ways when you want to compare with other universities and what they've done. So yes, I see us ranking in the top 10 in very few years. I know that is possible because we have enabling hands and the best at what they do. So I'm going to allow my co-host Ngozi to also introduce herself, and then we can get started with the topic of today.
Oh, thank you, Rukiat. Okpara Ngozi, an MSc student for data analytics and technology. And I want to welcome everybody to this November to Remember Day 4. And we have a speaker, Professor Jerome Carson, who will be speaking to us about the PhD journey and embarking on the academic odyssey of a PhD is a transformative and deep personal journey. The PhD journey encapsulates the myriad experiences, challenges, and triumphs encountered along the path of doctoral research. So in this exploration, Professor Jerome Carson will share the highs and lows, the unexpected discoveries, and the growth that unfolds through the pursuit of knowledge at the highest level. Join us in reflecting on the twists and turns, the resilience cultivated, the PhD opportunities at Bolton, and the profound moments that define the intricate tapestry of this educational adventure. Ladies and gentlemen, follow me to welcome Professor Jerome Carson. So you can have the floor.
Before he comes in, Sam is already here. So let's have Sam Johnson first before Professor Jerome.
Thank you, Dr. Salstein. Thank you for introducing us there. Really very, very short and sweet from me. I just want to say it's a huge privilege and pleasure to be back again on this 4th evening of November to remember. Even more of a pleasure and a privilege to introduce and welcome Professor Jerome Carson, who is a huge friend to many of us, many of the academic faculty across the university, and much loved by his students, and has brought a great deal of good to the university, as well as a masterful academic prowess. So welcome, Jerome, and thank you for spending this evening with us.
Right, Celestine, can I share my screen now? Yeah? Okay, well, thanks for coming. The actual description of the presentation that I'm going to be giving tonight wasn't written by me, but it was beautifully poetic. And I thought to myself, oh my God, is that what I've got to live up to? So I'll try my best and to talk about the PhD journey and beyond. So hopefully there'll be something in it for everyone. So really what I'm trying to do is those of you that are doing master's degrees, maybe thinking about doing a PhD, for those of you actually already studying for a PhD, for those of you maybe who have a PhD, and really what I'm going to be talking about is the PhD journey and beyond that journey, what happens after you get the PhD. So I think it's interesting to reflect what actually defines a university academic, and would I recognize one if I saw one? Now that's interesting here at the University of Bolton because we have across the road from us, we have Bolton College, which is a further education institution. Next door to us, we have the University Collegiate School. And these institutions have academics, but what actually defines a university academic? Now, I would respectfully suggest that there are three things that define a university academic. Firstly, the knowledge. One of the things we're fortunate to be able to do in higher education is to specialize in particular fields. So often the people who are teaching you at university have a great deal of specialist knowledge in their own subject. So you really are spending time with people who know their subject often inside out. The second thing, and my colleagues probably won't thank me for mentioning this, the second thing that defines a university academic is having a doctorate. Now, we're a teaching intensive university. Our primary focus is the quality of teaching, and our university is renowned for high quality teaching. And it's the quality of that teaching that has led us to position of number 30 in the Guardian League tables. But our Vice Chancellor is signalling very clearly that he wants us to move more towards research, to maintain the high standards of teaching, but also to focus more on research. And all our staff are expected to register for a doctorate. And in psychology, about 50% of the staff have doctorates, and the other 50% are all going to start working towards a doctorate in, I understand, January 2024. So hopefully in 4 years' time, everyone will have a doctorate in psychology. And then the third thing I think that defines a university academic is publications. Now, why are publications so important? Publications are so important because if we're thinking about peer-reviewed publications, your work has been scrutinized by independent experts that shows your work is of a very high standard. And I will be mentioning Dr. Wendy several times during this presentation. And it's difficult to find metaphors to describe Dr. Wendy, but I will try a wee bit later. But one of the things that he majors on is publications. So I want to switch and tell you a little bit about love. And in fact, really, to have sold this presentation, Dr. Wendy, we should have called it Love in the PhD Student, or even better, Sex in the PhD Student. If it had been called Sex in the PhD Student, there would have been 100 people on this call. So love, why is love important? And what is it that constitutes true romantic love? Well, Robert Sternberg has a couple of theories on love, but the one I'm going to share with you tonight is his triangular theory of love. And this, and you can reflect on this for yourselves as I'm talking and think, is this true? Now, even if it's not true, it's not my theory, it's someone else's theory. But he argues you need three things for true love. Firstly, there has to be intimacy between the two partners. Yeah. A sort of connection, at whatever level you might take that to be. Secondly, there's got to be passion. You've got to feel passionate about the person you love. And thirdly, there's got to be commitment. You've got to be committed to the person you actually love. So a very simple theory of love. And I'm going to come back to this at the end in terms of how that fits in with research. So a PhD journey, a journey by definition has a destination. There's a lovely movie called Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, and maybe Sam is the only one that can remember this movie, but it featured, in those days, an American singer called Chris Christopherson, who became a movie star. And it's about a lady called Alice, and she sets out with her son to travel to Monterey in California. Unfortunately, en route, she meets Chris Christopherson. And yes, you've guessed it, she falls in love. And she never actually gets to Monterey. So she never gets to her destination. With the PhD journey, the destination is clear. The destination is to obtain your PhD. And those people that actually stay on that journey, most of them actually accomplish it, despite all the ups and downs that we've heard of earlier. So I am going to guide you through that journey. So one of the things you've got to wonder about is your guide competent to take you on this journey? So I got my PhD in 2005 when I was 48 years of age. Now that's quite a while ago, but it's older than many of you on this Zoom call, actually. I started in Bolton as a professor in 2012. I have 29 of my students have finished their PhDs and are qualified. Currently, I'm supervising 12 PhD students, so I've always got room for Sam. In terms of my examining experience, I've examined over about 14 or 15 PhDs at different universities and also here. I'm currently, and have been for the last 8 years or so, the chair of the Board of Studies for Higher Research Degrees, which is the committee in the university that oversees all PhD and MPhil provision. Future plans. Well, I want to get to 40 completions. So I already have 29. So I want to get 11 more. Now you might say, well, why only 11 more? That's not very ambitious. Well, you know, age will probably catch up with me because as Ruki said, well, gee whiz, this guy did his undergraduate degree in 1979. He's got to be getting on. Ruki, you're entirely right. This guy is getting on. This guy is now 66 years of age. And in this country, it means you get a winter heating allowance when you're 66 and you get a pension. So unlike poor Ngozi there, that's having to wrap up against this cold British weather, I'm able to have £500 of extra heating courtesy of the government. So that's my sort of background. But to actually dig into it a little bit deeper. So I did my degree in psychology at the University of Reading. After I qualified, I worked for a year as a nursing assistant. Then I worked for a year as an assistant psychologist. Then I did my clinical training, which was 2.5 years. After that, I got a job as what was called in those days a basic grade clinical psychologist at Kidderminster General Hospital. I worked there for 14 months. And then I worked in a very large asylum called Claybury Hospital, which was due for closure. but I worked there for 6 years and 9 months. I then moved to the Institute of Psychiatry in South London. I was there for 18 years and then transferred to the Maudsley for another 5 years. And I have been at Bolton, as Ruki says, over 11 years now. So just breaking that down to the dates. So 76 to 79, I was an undergraduate. From 81 to 84, I did my master's in clinical, and then rose up through the ranks, basic grade, senior, then principal clinical psychologist. And then in 1992, I moved to the Institute of Psychiatry in South London, senior lecturer there in 1997, and then transferred to the Trust, where I was a consultant clinical psychologist for 5 years before retiring in 2011 with a National Health Service pension. And from 2012, I've been Professor of Psychology at the University of Bolton. So I actually did this PhD journey twice. The first time I did the journey, from 1986 to 1989, I wasn't very successful. Part of the reason for that was the subject I chose was social skills training and schizophrenia. It wasn't the most stimulating topic in the world. It was the wrong topic at the wrong time in the wrong place. I say the wrong place. You can see a picture of Claybury. Claybury was a large hospital. And I think I was probably the only person in the entire hospital that was actually studying for a PhD. So it was a very lonely business actually doing a PhD while I worked at Claybury. The wrong time because at the time I had 2 young children, then 3 young children. And one of the problems was when I got back to work and got the children to bed and then sat down to do some work on a PhD, I was often so tired that I ended up falling asleep. So I might read one of the children a bedtime story and old dad would fall asleep with the child, you know, and none of the PhD work would be done. So it got to the point where I had a meeting with my supervisors and they said, gee, Jerome, you're not actually making much progress with your PhD. We think you should take a year out or you should withdraw from the PhD. So I decided to withdraw from the PhD. And I remember after I left the office at the Open University, which is where I was studying, and I went into my car and I sat in my car and I wept. So my first attempt at a PhD ended in failure. So when I moved to the Institute of Psychiatry in 1992, the Institute of Psychiatry is the premier psychiatric academic institution in the world. So they expect all the staff there to have PhDs. And when I was interviewed for the position of senior lecturer in 1997, I was told, you will never be any higher than a senior lecturer unless you actually get a PhD. So the topic I picked was stress in mental health workers. And part of the reason I picked that topic was I had already co-edited 2 books on the subject. I'd written lots of papers in it, and I thought I was a bit of a well-known person in that field. So it was the right topic, the right time, in the right place. However, when I had my Viva in 2003, I was given major changes, and as if that wasn't bad enough, I was then told, and you also need another Viva. Now, I'd heard of people being asked to make major changes to a PhD. I had never heard of anyone being asked to have another Viva. So that was pretty devastating. And I remember going home and the champagne and the steak dinner were all ready for the celebrations. Well, I'm afraid I went to bed. I was so disappointed. But in 2005, I managed to get my PhD, which was awarded by King's College London. And these were the central characters in my PhD. So my examiners were Professor Charlie Brooker and Professor Susan Mickey. Now, Professor Susan Mickey is probably most famous during COVID because she was on the television quite a lot during COVID. Now, I had never actually met her before. I'd read some of her work, but I'm afraid these two characters gave me a very tough time, and I wasn't able to answer all of her questions very well, which was why I had to have a second viva. I had two professors who were supervisors, Professor Elizabeth Kuipers and Professor David Hemsley. But even despite the fact of having two very experienced professors, they didn't prepare me for what was to become the viva from hell. So it's interesting. I hope that I prepare my own students a bit better than I was prepared. But my real mentor is this chap here, Professor Kevin Gurney with the glasses at the top, who was Professor of Psychiatric Nursing at the Institute of Psychiatry, and he's become a friend over the years, and I'll say a little bit about him a bit later. My other mentor was Dr. Frank Holloway, who's a consultant psychiatrist that I worked with. So, one of the things about the University of Bolton is you become a big fish in a small pond. And Sam might well say, looking at that photo, well, Jerome, you certainly qualify as a big fish just looking at you in that suit. And if Sam's seen me recently, she will have noticed that I have lost 4 stone in weight, Sam. So that picture wouldn't really apply. Now, Brother Celestine. Oh, thank you very much, Sam. Sam's clapping. So this is the league table of academics at the University of Bolton. And you can see I am the second most prolific academic in the history of the University of Bolton on Scopus. There is only one person higher than me, and that's Professor A. And I won't really mention that that is Professor Dick Horrocks because I shouldn't mention him by name. Professor Horrocks is about 82, and he's still writing papers at the age of 82. Now, about 6 months ago, I found him in the library at the university. He was doing some copying, and I said, Dick, what the hell are you doing here? You should be at home now pushing your feet up. But Professor Horrocks refuses to stop academic work, and he's still publishing. But fortunately, he's slowed down. Now, there are 3 things in this table that you need to notice. The first thing is outputs, and that is simply the number of papers or books that are recorded in Scopus. Now, if you work at this university, you're actually able to access Scopus free of charge, and you have full access to Scopus. Now, I was speaking to a professor this morning who shall remain nameless, who said to me, what's Scopus? I found that somewhat hard to believe, as I'm sure Dr. Wendy will as well, and Sam has just passed out on that news. So Scopus refers to the number of outputs. H-index refers to the number of times your papers are cited by other researchers. And then we have the list of citations. Now, those of you that are very good at reading tables will see Dr. Wendy only has 128 papers, and I have 202 papers. So Dr. Wendy is 74 papers behind me. Now, I'm not actually very comfortable with that, because Dr. Wendy is driving at 100 miles an hour, And I know that if I ever get to be the top-rated academic in this institution, I'll only be the top-rated academic for 1 or 2 months, because as sure as night follows day, Dr. Wendy will overtake me. And you can see he's already got a higher H index. He's already got more citations than me, even though he doesn't have as many more outputs. So my brother from another mother and I are both big fish in a small pond. Now, there's a Chinese proverb which says, wherever you drink, remember the source. Remember where you came from. So I came from this place, King's College London. So while at Bolton, I'm the second most prolific academic ever, at King's College London in the Department of Psychology, and that's just one department, you can see I'm the lowest ranked in terms of the H index, which is the middle column. My outputs aren't the lowest. I've got quite a good number of outputs, but look at the number of citations that these other people have. So Professor Geoffrey Gray, who's sadly dead now, has 28,000 citations. Yeah. Now, one of the interesting things, Celestine, about Scopus and the H index is because Geoffrey Gray is dead, he's not producing any more papers, but he continues to receive citations. So even from the grave, Professor Gray's H index is rising. Now, I think we can be fairly certain, unless he has a Lazarine resurrection, he's not going to come back. But his H index is never going to go down. It's going to go up. And so at a place like the Institute of Psychiatry, I'm afraid I was a very small fish in a big pond. And there's a quotation here from that well-known scholar, Victoria Beckham, who says, in England, David and I are big fish in a small pond. But in LA, we are tiny, tiny, tiny fish in a big pond. So the size of you as a fish depends what pond you're actually swimming in. So getting a PhD, you don't need to make a major discovery to actually get a PhD. You just need to show that you're able to do good enough research independently. What are the key ingredients? Well, according to Petra and Rugg, the key ingredients are firstly a thesis which has one coherent overriding story or argument that embodies a research insight. Secondly, it needs to be situated in existing knowledge and a critical review of previous research which motivates and justifies the research question. Thirdly, there needs to be the contribution of something new, a significant contribution to knowledge. Fourthly, there needs to be an appropriate voice and argument, the provision of clear and explicit evidence, substantiation, and chain of inference. So they conclude, a good PhD is based on an honest report of research that reflects sound practice and well-articulated critical thinking. Now, we do actually have 4 different types of PhD at this university, and some other universities have as many as we do. Some other universities only have 2 different types of PhD. So we have the traditional research-based PhD, which Dr. Wendy has and which I have, and of those I have 18 completions. PhD by publication, and that can be done retrospectively, going backwards, or prospectively, going forwards. And 5 of my PhDs have been using generally the retrospective route. The third type of PhD is a PhD by professional practice, which can only be done retrospectively. And in that, I have 6 completions. So that is where, by virtue of the work you've done, you have had a significant impact on your profession. You may not have had the time to do a PhD because you've been working full time, but your professional practice has been at such a high level as to merit, with appropriate additional evidence, the award of a PhD by professional practice. And then the fourth type of PhD is the professional doctorate. And here that is led by Professor Russell Gerbert, and that can be from people from a variety of disciplines, and it involves also a work-related research project. So it tends to be a PhD for practitioners who are still working in their field. So why would you want to do a PhD? Always have to think about that. What are your reasons for actually doing one? What topic is it you want to actually research? Will it be of sufficient interest to sustain you for 3 years? And it is actually quite a lonely process because we all tend to do different types of PhDs with different subjects. So you are as lonely as a long distance runner. As in life, peer support isn't just critical, it is in fact life support. The only one that truly understands what you're going through is another PhD student. Now, to try and help our own PhD students in psychology, a few months ago we set up Coffee and Cakes, which provides them with 3 free coffee and cakes. We have a fortnightly virtual skills and spills session where we address PhD topics from the perspective of psychology. And this year we had the first of what is going to be now an annual psychology PhD. I said workshop, it should have been conference. So we're going to have an annual conference for our PhD students in psychology. Now, Sam will remember this lady. This lady is Tara Brabazon. And the first day I started at the University of Bolton, I got into the lift with this lady and I said to her, "Excuse me, are you Professor Tara Brabazon?" And the reason I recognized her was because I'd done quite a bit of research on who the other academics were at the University of Bolton. And I recognized Professor Brabazon. Sam would say, it's impossible not to recognize Tara Brabazon. She's a larger-than-life character. Now, the significance of Tara Brabazon for PhD students is she has done more for PhD students than any other academic on this planet. Now, you might say, well, how's that? She has done a whole series of videos about different parts of the PhD journey, from how to do a systematic literature review, how to phrase your significant and original contribution to knowledge, to how to prepare for your PhD viva. And she's come up with these 10 tips that you need to know when you're choosing your PhD supervisor. Now, it's very interesting this because, you see, I think a lot of PhD students don't bother to ask their supervisors this. So the best predictor of success is going with a PhD supervisor who has a successful record of PhD completions. Oh, Professor Carson, you've got 29 completions. That's a lot. Yes, it is a lot. It's about the second highest in the university. I think Professor Morton has probably got more completions than me, but that's a lot of PhD completions. Second thing she says, choose your own supervisor. Don't let the institution choose one for you, because the institution will try and choose one for you. It will try and pick someone, perhaps, that they feel needs to get the experience of being a PhD supervisor. Now, don't always be attracted by the star PhD person, the star professor, because sometimes these characters spend a lot of time away from the university. And when I worked at the Institute of Psychiatry, a lot of the professors were away at international conferences all of the time. Her next point is find a supervisor who will protect you from the bureaucracy. Well, I don't know how much bureaucracy there is really. And the little bit of bureaucracy that you have to do at this university is actually beneficial. Does your supervisor write anything independently? Well, this is a very interesting one. And as Dr. Wendy will know, that Scopus now provides a metric, which it says how many papers you're the first author on, and if you have published anything independently. And if you look me up, you'll see, well, I've done very few papers on my own. Most of my papers are with my PhD students, my master's students, my undergraduate students, and my colleagues. She says be wary of co-supervisors. So I put that in blue because I'm not sure I agree with her on that. Because you can actually sometimes get a very good co-supervisor. And for some students, we sometimes supervise together. So that's to say, it's buy one, get one free on supervisors sometimes, where you get two of them. A supervisor active in the area of your research can turbocharge you. I was just trying to think, what area is Dr. Celestine active in? That's a great problem. He's active in so many flipping areas. He can probably turbocharge you in each one of those. Teaching during your PhD will help prepare you for an academic career. Now, some PhD students would love to get a teaching qualification alongside the PhD, but your prime purpose is to get a PhD, not to become a university lecturer. Now, at this university, we do have a course that PhD students can do, that heads of school like Sam can authorize them to do. And we do try and enable our students to get teaching experience and also to do that course. Weekly supervision is essential. The minimum you are entitled to ask for as a PhD student is 1 hour a fortnight. 1 hour a fortnight, which means you should see your PhD Director of Studies for at least 30 minutes a week, or 1 hour and a fortnight. I put this last one in blue as well. Do not choose a supervisor who needs you more than you need them. And I'm slightly ambivalent about that because sadly, Sam, at least on the technical side, I need some of my PhD students more than they need me, because they know much more about technical things than the old boy does. So I'm not sure that I completely concur. Tara obviously is an expert in media, so she probably doesn't need anyone to help her with that side of things. So please look up her videos on YouTube. Professor Tara Brabazon, she really is quite an amazing woman. So Ruja and Petra came up with a number of tips for PhD students. Read, read, read. Do lots of reading. Write, write, write. Do lots of writing. Keep an annotated bibliography as you go through. Form an informal committee of helpers, people that are going to help you at various stages. And that help may just be offering you support. It may be other things, but try and find a couple of people that are going to help you. As I said earlier, it can be a lonely journey. Expose your work. What that means is give papers, give talks in departmental seminars, stand up, present in front of other people. so that you can be asked questions, your work can be scrutinized. It will help you when you come to the PhD Viva if you've already done this. So what? Learn to ask the other questions. You've done this. Well, so what about what you've done? What's it mean? Is it important? Think about challenging what you're actually doing. Never hide from your supervisor. Your supervisor is there to help you. Always make backups. A number of people, oh, the laptop was stolen. I forgot to save it on the University M drive. Now, Sam, if that University M drive goes, we're all done, aren't we? Because all of us have all our work on the University M drive. So I suppose that will collapse the whole system if we lost that. Read at least one thesis cover to cover. Read at least one thesis cover to cover. Now, Dr. Wendy, I asked my colleague, Dr. Chandler, who is responsible for PhDs in psychology, how many PhDs she had read before she submitted her own. And very interestingly, Dr. Wendy, she read 8 PhDs that had been supervised by her 2 examiners. She had 2 external examiners because she was a member of staff. So she read 8 of the PhDs that these characters had supervised, in addition to reading other PhDs. So she really went to town on that. And at the end of the day, a doctorate is pass or fail. Unfortunately, for most people, the vast majority of people, it is a pass. I've only witnessed in my entire career only 2 people fail a PhD. It's not a pleasant experience to actually watch. So, the PhD student supervisory relationship. What are supervisors expecting from you? Well, you're a PhD student, so they expect you to be independent. They expect you to produce work that isn't just a hastily put together first draft. They expect you to have regular meetings with them. They expect you to be honest when reporting on your progress. And it's interesting just reading this one out, Sam, because in my first PhD, I can assure you, I was not honest when I reported on my progress. I overemphasized how well I was doing when in fact I wasn't. Supervisors expect students to follow their advice, especially when it's been given at the student's request. Supervisors expect students to be excited about their work, able to surprise them, and fun to be with. What? Well, that's what supervisors say. So there is no academic relationship quite like that of a PhD supervisor and their student. If we think about BSc projects, they generally last 1 academic year. MSc projects will last a maximum of 18 months. Now you might say, oh, what if you're on a 2-year MSc? Well, they're not going to start their project in the first several months. It takes them a while before they actually start their project. PhD supervision is much more intense and lasts for a minimum of 3 years. So you need to think, what would you expect from your supervisor? What are you looking for from the PhD supervisor that's going to take you on? So it's important in any field to have people who inspire you, that you look at and you think, I'd like to be like that person one day. So here's just a couple of people. I'm inspired by a lot of people, but these are just a couple of psychologists. So the chap on the left is Professor Hans Ising. He left Nazi Germany when he was 18 years of age and came to England and spent the rest of his life in England. He was the head of department at the Institute of Psychiatry in the psychology department, though he'd retired when I left. He's a legend in the field of psychology. His name is associated with the Eysenck Personality Questionnaire. He published something like 500 papers, absolutely incredible. I once got into a lift with him, and I thought, well, I'm one-on-one with a great man. let me ask him a question. And I said to him, I said, Professor Rising, when you were a student, you published 6 papers when you were only an undergraduate student. And he said, yes, that's correct, I did. So taking my life in my hands, I said, it must have been easy to get published in those days. And the great man drew a breath and he said, well, you know, nowadays, there are so many journals, I suppose it just balances out. And it was very true. There are now thousands and thousands of journals that you can get your papers published in. There were fewer journals in those days, but it's just as easier, it's just as difficult. The other person is Professor Geoffrey Gray, who was the son of a tailor from the East End of London, who went to Oxford and was an incredibly intelligent man. He spoke fluent Farsi. He was in the British Intelligence Service, and he became the head of department at the Institute of Psychiatry after Professor Eisen actually. And one of the interesting things about him was that he retired at the age of 65, and sadly, a couple of years later, he passed away. He developed cancer and passed away. And I sometimes look back and I think, my God, I probably had 2 or 3 individual meetings with him in his office. And I thought, gosh, I wish I could go back and just savor what an amazing person he was to have known. Professor Gurney is my mentor. He first came to a conference at Claybury in 1993. I went to his inaugural professorial lecture at the University of Middlesex. And then when he came to the Institute of Psychiatry, I went to that. I organized a living tribute for him last year. And I have continuing academic contact. In fact, he sent me an email earlier on this evening saying, Jerome, have you thought about setting up a podcast series? And I'm sort of thinking, what the hell is a podcast series? I'll need to ask Sam about that. So all of life is a coming home. All of the world, all trying to find a way home. As Dante put it, in the middle of the journey in my life, I found myself in a dark wood, for I'd lost the right path. Eventually, I would find the right path, but in the most unlikely place. And to a large degree, I found that path in Bolton. So here we persuaded the university to invite Professor Ho over here in 2016. He was the leading positive psychologist in Asia. And Chatharika and myself persuaded Professor Martin Seligman, the chap next to me, to go to Sri Lanka for a conference in 2017. That was absolutely amazing. He is in the top 3 psychologists in the world, and we had a wonderful time with him. So back to the love triangle. So intimacy. So you have intimacy with colleagues and students on a professional basis. Bolton is a university unlike any other university. Many of the students we have here have backgrounds that Charles Dickens would struggle to write about. They have gone through some of the most amazing adversity, you would not believe it. One of Sam's students was involved in a project a couple of years ago. And what we asked them to do was to write a letter to your 16-year-old self. What advice would you give your 16-year-old self? And then they had to read this letter out to the students in the school that we were working in. And this young woman said that in her letter, she said, well, my father died when I was 3. My mother left home when I was 5. And at school, I was bullied because I didn't have a mother and a father. And you think, bloody hell, I thought I had a tough life. Nothing like a lot of the people that we teach here. Passion. You have to have a passion for your subject. Without passion, you're not going to be driven to really excel. And commitment. having commitment to your students, having commitment to this institution. And our Vice Chancellor, we're very fortunate. Our Vice Chancellor's been here a long time, and he tells us he's going to be here even longer. So he is completely committed to this institution, as are many of the senior staff. And Sam Johnson here has been in this institution for, I won't say how many years, because she's just said, don't you dare mention it. I will not mention it, Sam. I promise I won't mention it. So this is what it's about. These are two of my PhD students. Interestingly, two students who got their PhDs by professional practice. So Jan is one of our lecturers, and she's just brought out her first book, Positive Psychology Interventions for Healthcare Staff, published by Emerald and produced this year. And Barry, Dr. Barry Green, spent his entire year in forensic mental health nursing and then did his PhD with me. He's now a visiting research fellow, and he has published several journal papers since he got his PhD. Both got their PhDs after their 60th birthday. So it's never too late to start a PhD. So you really got to love research. And there are 5 areas that I love to research. Mental health recovery has always been a passion of mine. How to help people recover from major mental health problems. Secondly, positive psychology, which focuses very simply on what strengthens people. So build people's strengths rather than looking at their weaknesses. Also ethnography, perhaps my most cherished discovery in recent years, which is where you write about your own experiences, but you back them up with research and reflection. Alcohol addiction, I know painfully, because until 6 years ago, I used to like 1 or 2 dozen drinks. Thankfully, those days are in the past. And I suppose as I'm now 66, I've developed increasing interest in bereavement. So love your research. Whatever you're studying, love your research. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Jerome. I really had a handful of experience from what you said, and I have a key take home. I also turned it down. So the type of pond will determine the kind of fish that you are. So you might think that you're a big fish or you're in a small pond, and you might actually be a small fish in a big.
Right.
Okay, I think I'm switching that up.
Right. Sorry, I'm getting it sounds a bit distorted and I'm hard of hearing. Sam, can you tell me what that question was, please? And I'll answer it.
Sorry, I missed it slightly as well. Were you saying, Ruki, that you know, what does it feel like to be a big fish in a small pond, or a small pond in a big fish in a small pond, not a small pond in a big fish? Is that what you were asking there?
Okay. Yeah. Is that?
No, I wasn't asking a question. I was affirming what you said.
Right. What was?
I was affirming what you said. It wasn't a question. I was affirming what you said.
Right.
Affirming. Right. Okay. Sorry.
She was having a daydream of about the pond and the fish.
Well, one of the interesting things about being a big fish in a small pond is the admiration you get. So a lot of people in this university just refer to me as Prof. Oh, hi, Prof. And actually, that is very affirming because it comes from a position of great respect. And I'd like to think that if you were to ask my own students that, and one of the things that after the graduation this year, Aris Mateo, who's Director of External Relations here, said to me, your students love you. And I said, well, actually, I love my students. And in a sense, that's one of the differences with Bolton. that you know, the student's experience here is different. And you know, I think you could go to Sam if you're one of her students, and Sam's door would be open, and Sam would listen to whatever your concern was. So it's not just me. I think there are hundreds of people in this institution who really work very hard with students and to make the students' experience as good as it is here. So thank you, Ruki. Dr. Wendy.
Yes, we are entering question time, and I wanted to add something to the 10 nuggets from the professor you mentioned. You said students should choose their supervisors. Now, the issue that is on, which I've noticed, students tend to ask questions for who is easy supervisor. Do you choose who is easy? Like I tell my students very clearly, when they come to me and said, if you want me to be your supervisor, your mentor, I also have to be your tormentor. It's both ways. Because until we have something to drag you out, you know, with the kind of thing I've seen, you can't be successful. So when you tell someone, choose your supervisor, and they're looking, who is going to make it easy for me? I don't need to see him every week. I only see him once a month. You will finish the PhD for me, but you achieve nothing. Because I've seen a lot of people with their PhD, like Professor Jerome said, and someone is asking, what is Scopus? You know, so I still think that idea. I don't know what you have to say about it, Professor Jerome.
Well, I think it's an interesting notion, isn't it? The supervisor as tormentor. Wow. But I think, in a sense, what you want and what every supervisor wants is for the student to do as well as possible. Now, we were having a chat earlier about RR2 examinations here, when students have to present their research in front of at least 2 academic colleagues from their own discipline and an independent chair. And some students have complained how difficult it is. And I've got to be honest with you and actually say that's a good thing, because, you know, what's coming next is the Viva. And the Viva, let's be honest about this, the Viva is the most important interview you will ever have in your life. Now, some people say, oh no, Jerome, you're wrong. A job interview is the most important. No, no, no. You'll have many job interviews in your life. You'll only have one PhD Viva, except if you're really unfortunate like me and you'll have 2. But I didn't choose to have 2, it just happened. So being tormented, being pushed, actually can be helpful. But I'm sure when Celestine says that, he's a gentle tormentor.
Could I ask a question, please, Jerome, if that's okay? As you say, I like your analogy of, you know, the long distance runner. You know, a PhD isn't a sprint. It's not a 100 meters dash or even 200 meters dash. It is a true marathon over very difficult terrain. Could you give us an example? I mean, you've supervised many students over the years now. At what point in that timeline do you think that students feel the most vulnerable? When do you feel students are more likely to stumble and have to really pick themselves up?
Well, there's 2 answers to that, Sam. There's the academic answers, you know, so it may be that the R2 goes badly and they have to do another R2. Sometimes, strangely enough, we had one student at a progress report this year was actually tripped up over very simple things. Well, what are the aims and objectives of your research? And could not answer that question, and said later, well, I wasn't expecting that question because normally it's a formality. So they stumbled then. So you've got academic stumbles, and you've also got life stumbles. Now, a PhD minimum is 3 years. You think about your life over the last 3 years, Sam, and what's happened in your personal life. And I'm not picking you out because there's an awful lot of things that happen in your particular personal life, but just life in general for all of us, if you think. So sometimes life can interfere and cause us to stumble as well. And sometimes we have to divert energy that should be devoted to our studies to dealing with problems that we may have outside. So there are two sorts of stumbles: academic stumbles and personal stumbles.
Thank you, Jerome.
More questions? Do we have people with questions about PhD?
I have a question, sir.
Okay.
If the PhD goes more than 4 years, is it valid or not?
Is it valid or not? Well, it took me 9 years. And we've written a paper. I've written a paper with one of my PhD students, Dr. Mats Niklasen, which is about both of our PhD journeys, both of which lasted longer than many marriages, sadly. He eventually got it. So what happens actually is if you go over 4 years, you have to get an extension from the Board of Studies. There has to be a reason why you're going over 4 years. But listen, it doesn't matter whether it takes you 3 years or 10 years. A PhD is still a PhD. In terms of its validity, you've got to make sure that it's up to date. So if you started a PhD, say 5 years ago, and you're about to submit it, it has to have recent literature. So you can't say, oh, I did my literature search 5 years ago, because one of the things the examiners are looking for is that you're up to date with current literature. So 4 years, 10 years, you can still get a PhD.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Another question. To publish in Scopus journals, it takes a long time to get your paper accepted and then publication. This is the reason I'm getting delayed with my PhD submission.
Well, that's wrong. And I'll tell you why that's wrong. Because all journals now have advanced publication online. So you can write a paper that's accepted, and within 2 weeks, it's published online. Now, it won't actually appear in the journal itself until they have space for it. If the paper is good enough, it will be published quickly. Sometimes it depends on the quality of the paper. It depends on the journal. Some journals are easier to get into than other journals. Most of the journals Dr. Wendy gets into are notoriously easy. I'm just winding you up, Celestine. I'm just winding you up. I know you get your papers into high impact factor journals. So there are some journals that are virtually impossible to get into. So one of my colleagues came in and he waved his arms at me. He said, I've got a paper in Nature. And Nature is one of the top journals in the world. So I nearly fell off the chair. But when I actually picked myself up again, I said, actually, what part of Nature? And he said, Nature Scientific Reports. I said, that is not Nature. That is Nature Scientific Reports. Impact factor 5. The impact factor of Nature itself is probably about 80. Impact factor refers to how often papers in a particular journal are cited by other top journals. And you can do a calculation which gives you a score for each journal. The most prestigious journal in the world today is a journal called The Lancet, which is a British medical journal. So if Uncle Celestine gets a paper in The Lancet, I personally will buy him a bottle of champagne and serenade him in Bolton. That's how
I accept the challenge.
Accept the challenge.
Accept the challenge.
The Lancet rejects.
Very nice, huh?
The Lancet rejects 95% of all papers submitted, and even the 5% that are accepted often have to be revised. So be careful what journal you submit to. What I always recommend is start with an easier journal, because the last thing you want is your first paper to be rejected. And sometimes it takes 3 or 4 goes. But the likes of Dr. Wendy and myself, we're never deterred by rejections. We just look at what the comments are, revise it, send it to another journal. We rarely give up. Right, Eugene Harinder?
Yes.
Okay, we have a question at the chat box.
All right, okay. The chat.
A student is asking, what initiatives is the University of Bolton putting in place to encourage more international students to do PhD, like maybe offering scholarship to students that have distinction in their masters? Is that available to, propel them to pursue a PhD program?
Well, there are scholarships here, but, people think a scholarship means you're actually paid to do your PhD. Scholarships in most universities just mean there's a reduction of a couple of £1,000 on fees. It's very rare. Now, we, unfortunately, are one of the poorer universities. Some of these very big universities actually have many more scholarships than we have. Sometimes the disadvantage of a scholarship, so if you went to the University of Manchester and there's a professor there advertising a PhD, the problem you have is you have to do the research they want you to do. You can't choose your own research. So if you're funding yourself, it's tough, but you probably get more selection over what you're able to research. So a funded PhD sometimes means you're tied in to doing what the researchers have been paid to research.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Professor Carson. I think our student would love to hear about the minimum number of years one can do a PhD.
Minimum number of years.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, one of my students has just submitted her PhD, and she did it in 2.5 years. Now that is very unusual. The minimum is generally is 3. Now, if a student submits in 2.5, you have to get permission from the Board of Studies, and there has to be a letter from the Director of Studies saying, I believe this student has got sufficient material, is sufficiently equipped to be able to handle the PhD viva, and the work is good enough to be submitted now.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I think that's okay. But compared to what I know so far,
yeah.
For my previous university where I did my PhD, one student did his PhD in 2 years and 3 months.
Right. Yeah. Well, 3 years is generally the minimum.
2 years.
The shortest I've ever come across is one of my colleagues at the Institute of Psychiatry, Professor Gisli Johnson, did a PhD in 18 months. And but Gisli Johnson is a bit of a one-off. I don't know. Most people will take a minimum of 3 years. And then to collect all your data, write it up, sometimes it takes 4. And it's probably closer to 4 than 3. So what's the secret to novel topics and ideas? Wow, that's a great question. I wish I knew. I think sometimes one of the interesting things, I'm getting more ideas now at 66 than I was getting at 26, 36, 46, or 56. So the secret is get to 66, I suppose. I don't know. I mean, if we actually, one of the things, Dr. Wendy and I were having a discussion with Professor Abdul Haq on Monday about the difference between Americans and the Chinese in terms of creativity. The Americans are more creative than the Chinese. Now, why that is, I suspect it's more to do with the American system and Americans encouraging creativity more and working more on creativity. Whereas the Chinese, we know, are brilliant at copying ideas, absolutely fantastic, can copy things perfectly. But to be creative is a different thing. Now we've got Sam with us, who's a specialist in creativity. What's the secret? I don't know. Sam, do you have an answer for us?
From my perspective, I would say you've already touched upon this, Jerome. In many ways, if you feel passionately about something in your world, rather than it being an abstraction, then very often something wonderfully unique and original can come from that, because it's a combination both of your intellectual interest, but also deep felt emotion. Now, you can't copy deep felt emotion. It has to come from you. Once you start to simulate deep felt emotion, it's just a simulation, and it becomes bland and it's just repetition. So I think it's that strange mix between personal passion and heart and mind that brings a remarkable creativity together. And that's in any topic. That can be in academic life, it can be in music, it can be in the arts, it could be in writing, it can be in the sports, it can be in any manifestation of passion. In its best sense would be my view. It's what you bring. You have to bring heart to it, and then originality will follow.
Yeah, I also feel it is like one of my mentors will say, what the problem you are passing through is what you are created to solve. You know, and I picked that up when I did my PhD. You know, we were passing through in Delta. You know, the oil companies were coming and scooping the oil. You know, then we have also people going there to bomb the pipelines. And I wanted to create an Internet of sensors that could protect the pipeline. I actually had a board. I set up everything. I went to the Nigerian government and presented it. You know, that is another story for another day, you know, because of corruption and politics. Then I came back, and then Sweden gave me full scholarship. I was being paid £10,000 every year to study in Aberdeen. And I created a security system between node to node and node to base station. You know, so what you have created, the best way to solve, to do anything, especially PhD, what are you going through? Discover a way out. Like I do tell my students, and I give them acrid, you know, number one is every research we do is on 5 levels. Number 1 is approving. Number 2 is creating. Number 3 is recreating or improving or disproving. So I tell them, I said, in terms of PhD, it's more of creating. You know, they will say knowing more and more of less and less. So, you know, that is the PhD I understand. So the idea comes from, what problem do you want to solve? Like Sam said, environmental issues. If you are passionate about a problem, go and look for a way. It will spur you up to read more about it. In the course of reading about it, you discover the solution. Now, this last time, summer, I went to Nigeria. I walked up to a place. I looked at the floor. My mom, when she was alive, taught me about leaves. And I lifted something up. I told my kids, I said, you know, this leaf can cure ulcer. He said, how do you know? I said, when my mom showed me, and when I was small, I used it for someone, and his ulcer disappeared. So I brought the liquid out, and I showed them. And I said, and I went to the bush again. I saw another one. I said, and this was what I was taught. This is more than 15, 20 years ago. So my boy was surprised that I could still remember. And I said, yes, because someone has a chicken pox, you know. And then I said, this leaf, if you put it on the floor, it can grow. You don't need the tree. Either you put the tree or, you know, and then you put it like this, I said, how do you? I said, yeah, because when you were small, I used it on you and the chicken pox disappeared after 2 days. So if we did not have that problem, I would not have remembered. So passion and what you're going through makes you to discover certain things. And they were like, Daddy, you would have gone into medicine. Maybe you would have been another creator in medicine. I said, I'm better in what I'm doing in computing. Yeah.
It's a wonderful story, Celestine.
HOV.
All right. Good evening, and thank you very much, Professor Jerome, for the session and presentation today. It's quite intriguing. My question is, I'm trying to look at the pursuit of PhD from the benefits and the outcome of venturing into PhDs. So besides the academic achievements, what are the other achievements per se with going into PhDs? And also, can we also look at the possibility of looking at what's the current connection between the level of people who've achieved their PhDs to the industries? What are the influence? What are the impacts of the various ideas and PhDs that have been done in the industry? Because usually it's about research in a particular aspect of life in a sector. So I feel if we begin to know more about the impact of PhDs, it would naturally encourage people to want to venture into PhD. So we would want to do our masters because we want to gain specific knowledge in a particular area so we can go into the industry and make impact. So, but PhD is more of, I believe, you trying to improve on a particular area, do a research, point out something in any industry vertical. So the question would be, if we want to, zero in into the University of Benin, University of Bolton, how would we say, or how would we measure the impact of the outcome of the PhDs, to the industry or to the economy here in the UK? And the other would be, all right. So I think that's it, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a very broad question. And there are some PhDs that don't seem to have an obvious application. There are other PhDs. So the student I mentioned who submitted early has developed a new intervention to help people with alcohol addiction. Now, alcohol addiction in this country is a major problem. So if you can find a better way of helping people get over an alcohol addiction, you actually save the country a lot of money, and you improve the quality of that person's life and the lives of their loved ones, because often alcohol has a profound effect on those people around them. I think one of the wonderful things about a university is, I mean, when Celestine was talking about the sort of problem-solving type PhD, I've traveled quite a bit with Professor Danny Morton, who's an engineer. Now, engineers and psychologists speak different languages, yeah? I speak the language of emotion. Danny doesn't actually deal in emotions. He just deals with solving problems. But we both contribute in different ways through the work we actually do. So I mean, of course, we have to be doing research that is of benefit to our communities, is benefit to business. It's just more obvious with some PhDs what that benefit is than it is with others. But yeah, I would agree. And again, this term that Sam reinforced of passion, having passion drives you to find solutions to problems, drives you to do something, to change things. The reason this student was so passionate about helping people with alcoholism is because, guess what? She was an alcoholic herself. So, arising out of her own recovery, she wanted to do something to help other people. So, I think passion is probably the thing that even Brother Celestine there, I mean, he has so much passion in him that you can't help but being swallowed up by it.
I was just going to say as well, if I may, and it's slightly anecdotal, but it's just a parallel that might be useful, is that, yes, whilst PhDs are an academic exercise to some degree, there's that continuing development of amazingly powerful transferable skills. And I think that's where the bridge is, that sometimes your specialism, it might not transfer into the sector that you actually move into. I mean, a good example would be, I mean, my son-in-law is an astrophysicist and studied his PhD at Corpus Christi at Cambridge, and he loves the galaxy. Okay, so since he was a tiny little boy, he loved Mars, Saturn, you name it. It's not my world, but that's his lifelong passion. And you know, it's incredibly hard to then go into work in astrophysics, even if you studied at Cambridge. But what he's doing, he's working with big data, solving big problems, crunching those massive numbers. So where he used to measure galaxies and black holes, what he's now looking at is huge problems, such as Celestina alluded to do with sustainability, to do with climate change, to do, you know, huge problems, because he's accustomed to dealing with huge solutions and huge calculations. So sometimes it's not just about the academic subject. You acquire skills in a very, very specific field, but can have a huge impact in multiple sectors, you know, so you mustn't underestimate your own developmental growth in your technical skills at the same time as you're developing your academic skills.
Yes, thank you, sir. Now, one thing about PhD is this: sometimes it makes you over passionate. You know, someone was telling me today that the way I spoke to a staff today, that I was too passionate, you know, and then he felt offended. So that is what PhD gives you, because sometimes you want to see results. You know, you know it. You are like, if we do this, it will come this way, you know. And then it brings you into a place where you are like, there must be a solution. I'm someone, I believe, if I come into a place, I want to see something moving. So PhD gives you that drive. Like somebody say, what do you get from it? Because PhD is you. It's your work. It's your creativity, especially when it's self-funded. So you are the master. You are the creator. You determine what goes in. So if you have been trained like that, there is no way you cannot make a part in anywhere you find yourself, because you know you started from nothing, and then at the end, like Brother Jerome said, PhD examination, we are not kind of making you to be scared, but that is the hardest interview ever. When I finished my PhD interview, and I came out, my wife called me and said, you know, you have been speaking for 5 hours. I did not know. There was bread, there was water, there was everything at University of Aberdeen. There was no question they did not ask me. 3 people had gone ahead and came out, they failed. So they wanted to see what will make this boy fail. So I was talking non-stop. Like I keep telling my students, just keep talking. I was demonstrating everything. When 5 hours, you know, so my wife picked the calculation and she said, 5 hours. And I checked the time. It was 5 hours. You know the funny thing? The old man from from Algeria, you know, professors from Algeria, his head was already white everywhere. He said, Celestine, if I tell you to begin this PhD again, what will you do afresh? I was like, good God, have mercy. After 5 hours, and I told him, I did this PhD 3 years. I'll finish it in 1 year. If I was to ask to start again. He said, why? I said, because all the mistakes I made, became a miracle, and I now know better. So my speed will be higher. He now looked at me and said, you passed your PhD. You know, and now the bread they brought, I took the bread, and once I came out to the University of Bolton engineering, every student was screaming, because to come out with the basket of bread means you pass. If I had taken the shortcut, the backyard, and go home, they would say this guy had failed his PhD. You know, so that is something that we always, number one is fulfillment, like we have said. Number two, it drives everything you do. Now we are encouraging that in Bolton. We are starting off a whole lot of offshoot. Next week, someone will be speaking. The head of entrepreneur of Bolton will be speaking on entrepreneur. Whatever you have learned, even in your master's and PhD, how you can create it and become an industry. After I finished my PhD, I started a company. I know how much I made in that company. You know, I'm hoping to get, if you're coming to do PhD so that you can be rich and be billionaire, okay. I don't know if Professor Jerome has a way of PhD people to be millionaires, you know, in pounds. But your idea that you create can be a company that will make so much money, not just for the money, even to help your family. Thank you. Any other question? I hope Ejobi will answer your question.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. Thank you all. Thank you.
Well, it was
Sam.
very interesting, Professor Jerome. Really a very helpful and informative session. I wish I could attend more sessions like this with you. More details about PhD and Scopus journals so that it will be helpful for me in my studies. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
We want to know who is the person speaking now and from which of the schools?
Well, I'm currently living in UAE, Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates, and I'm pursuing my PhD in India, which is my hometown. And right now I'm a professor working in a university college.
Very good. Thank you for
Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Ms. Kausar Fatima, basically from India. Thank you.
You are welcome to collaborate with us. And I know my brother Jerome will be very ready if you have any program in your school to come and speak on PhD. If another professor saw this topic, you know, from law, the Faculty of Law, and said, Celestine, I want to also speak on my PhD experience another day. I said, okay, the next week you can change your own topic to be your own PhD experience. The truth is this, there is no two ways that are the same. If I've told you my experience, if another person comes here and tell you experience, is always the same. It's always different. But
if we could have a WhatsApp group, what do you say? Because we can keep in touch. Maybe after this webinar, we may not be able to communicate with each other. So there should be a channel of communication. If we could add each other on the WhatsApp group and we can have more seminars and webinars like this.
Okay, in the chat group now, we will drop an email there where you can reach us. And it's very simple. There are no two Professor Jerome Carson in Bolton. So when you just type his name, Professor Carson or Celestine, our details will come out there. And we always respond to emails. Or Sam Johnson, if you want your school to collaborate with us, we're already doing something in UAE. I think we have 2 staffs that came from there also, you know. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Back now, we hand over to Sam Johnson.
Okay. Well, it's a great pleasure for me to. Can you see that, Jerome? This is your very special award. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and I'm sure everybody on the call will agree that we've been very lucky because we've been here at the right place at the right time with the right people to learn a great deal about how to succeed on your PhD journey. So thank you so much, Jerome, for your time. Thank you as ever, I'll stop sharing now. We'll get that electronic award later, Jerome. But just to say a huge thank you to everybody as well for contributing, for being part of this continuing conversation. It's a lovely community of learning and research that we're establishing here at the university. But thank you very, very much, Professor Jerome. That was a lovely, lovely session. Thank you very much. I think a round of applause, please, for Professor Jerome. That'd be lovely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Jerome.
For taking
Thank
this
you so
up,
much.
for taking it up on a very short notice, because the other person that was supposed to speak has some medical, emergency, so we had to bring him in. Tomorrow, someone from America, a professor in America, will be talking on cybersecurity. Please invite your friends, not just his own experiences, but also how we can make impact as a department, as a school, as a company, in whatever you are doing. He has spoken before, I think last year. He is very good. He told me, tell them I'm ready. So I'm passing that message that he's ready to deliver. Thank you, and see you all tomorrow.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thank you.
See you. See you tomorrow. Bye.